In the course of reporting this story for The New Yorker, I found that many migrants who reach the U.S. Mexico border are not given access to Mayan language translation at all. In fact, during credible fear interviews, during which migrants have to lay out why they're afraid of returning to their country of origin, many Mayan language speakers from Guatemala are forced to do so in Spanish, which is a language that they do not speak. So I've heard cases of people being deported after signing papers that they don't understand. I've heard cases of families being separated and children isolated, spoken to in Spanish, which is a language that they don't understand. And many Mayan language speakers, who are attempting to gain asylum, I'll say, they're not migrating into the United States seeking work, they're attempting to access asylum, and they're only often given access to Mayan language translation at their final court date, if at all.
Can you tell us a story? One of the people you profiled, this also goes to the horrific issue of the separation of parents and their children, how you begin your piece.
I wanted to focus the story not just on the Mayan language speakers who've been the victims of some of these immigration policies, but also on those Mayan language speakers who are doing their best to help. There's a large community of which Odilia is a part, and it's an honor to have her on the program with me, mostly based in California, although throughout the United States, that are providing Mayan language translation to immigrants crossing the U.S. border. And one of those people that I was able to speak with at great length and profile and follow is Osvaldo Vidal Martin, who is a Mam language speaker. Mam is one of 22 mutually unintelligible Mayan languages, and Osvaldo is based in Fruitvale, which is in the kind of Oakland area of California. And Osvaldo was actually called to the border about a year ago during the family separation crisis and asked to interpret for several lawyers at the Texas Civil Rights Project. And he and many other Mayan language translators went in both paid and volunteer capacity to the border. And one of the families that he encountered was that of Mario Perez Domingo, who was a Mam language speaker, separated from his 2-year-old girl at the border because the Border Patrol had asked him whether he paid for a birth certificate for his 2-year-old daughter with whom he was traveling. Now, Mario does not speak Spanish very well. Like many Mayan language speakers in Guatemala, he speaks enough to go to the store, maybe sell tomatoes in the market, but not to navigate a complex legal interview. And so, like many indigenous language speakers at the border, he was afraid and was answering yes to many of the questions that he was asked. And so in Guatemala, you do pay a very small fee to get a birth certificate. So when he was asked had he paid for the birth certificate of his daughter, he answered yes. And the Border Patrol agent used that answer as supposed evidence that he had paid for a false birth certificate, which was not true. And on the basis of that, he was separated from his daughter for several months. And because Mario only speaks Mam, he was not able to understand what was happening and why his daughter was separated from him. Again, Mam is his primary language, and he speaks very little Spanish, if at all. So he was answering yes, yes, yes to try to ingratiate himself to the authorities, to try to control what was clearly a very fearful situation. And only once Osvaldo, the Mam language translator from California, arrived on the scene in Texas was Mario's lawyer able to get all of the details of the case and work toward reuniting Mario Perez Domingo with his daughter, which eventually happened, but they were separated for a number of months because of language issues.
One of the things for us is the way that interpreting was developed was by Spanish-English interpreters, and nobody thought about us on how to develop a manual on the code of ethics, nothing was thought within us when these interpretation rules were developed. And, you know, some of the things for us as an indigenous interpreter, we were saying, well, these aren't making sense to us. We cannot interpret word per word. In the case of asylum, in my language, I will have to say that you have to leave because you could no longer be here because you're afraid that someone within this community or within this pueblo is going to hurt you, right? And if I say refugee, I'm afraid for my life that someone's going to kill me. So there are two different things. So if our interpreters do not know the difference between asylum and between refugee, they will not be able to convey the message. So we have to train them. What are these words? Because a lot of these pro-profit language agency, all the interpreters that they have, they borrow Spanish. o re'esh nabo asilo, re'esh nabo refugio. That's not being said anything to that individual or to that detainee, as opposed to you know, re chebo so yeshule bira yesundere, which is very different thing than just re'esh nabo asilo. So that's at the level we've gone in our language program to talk about how do we think about these words? How do we think from the immigration language to the court language to the medical language? How do we put it into our words? How do we describe it, right? Because it is asylum. It's very easy to just translate from Spanish, interpret from Spanish to English. However, for us, it's very descriptive, so we have to train our interpreters. But the for-profit language agencies is not about the human rights of the detainees. It's about making money. Who gets the bid? I've gotten calls from this company. Can you just take the calls? I can't because I don't know what variant of Zapotec it is. Just take the call. Zapotec is Zapotec. So what we're doing is training from a very different point as the standard models that they exist in the Spanish language, Spanish interpreting schools. We had to develop our own curricula. We had to develop our own glossary. We had to develop everything for ourselves as Indigenous people. So it's a lot of work, but I think it's so important that we're trained because the life of a person depends on us as the interpreters. If I go to a hospital and I'm not instructed how to give my child the medicine in my language, I might put them at risk. If I go to the court and I don't know how to say asylum and I don't understand the court system, I could be that tool to deport the person.